me to say to these people, these leaders, these lay leaders and staff leaders? What would you have me to say? And the Lord just brought me to one of my favorite characters in all of Scripture. He's a guy that I'd heard a lot about in the past, and I'd even read parts of the story, and I always associated one part of the story with him. But over the last several weeks, God has just had me living in this guy's story. So if I can, I just want to share out of the overflow of my heart today. I want to invite you to turn to Judges chapter 6 and 7. Judges chapter 6 and 7. I know you probably have it marked because you probably spent your quiet time in Judges this morning, and that's all right. So I want to speak to you on the life and the leadership of Gideon. I have 4 kids. I'd say their names are any, many, miny, and it, because there ain't be no mo, I promise you, all right? I am done. We are 4 and no more. I have 3 teenage boys and a daughter that God allowed us to adopt from Uganda. So, man, our life is busy. Well, we were on a road trip when they were a little younger. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but my oldest son and my youngest son began to fight and argue in the back seat. Anybody ever else had that experience? I mean, it's just brutal. You are a captive audience for kids fighting about nothing. And so I happen to look up at my second son. He's a massive kid. He's got fire engine red hair. He is massive. He's 6 foot, about 205 pounds. Bench press is almost 300 pounds. We call him Opie on steroids, man. He's just that kind of kid. And he's a football player extraordinaire and a rugby player extraordinaire. So life's fun with him. When he was younger, we were on this road trip, and my oldest and youngest began to fight and argue. And I look back, and Carter is his name. He had his hands in his lap, and he was looking out at the window and just enjoying the scenery. And I thought, man, this is a rare moment to praise Carter. And so I looked up, and I said, Carter, in the rearview mirror. He said, yeah, Dad. I said, man, Dad is so proud of you. He said, why are you proud of me? I said, because you're being good. He said, well, Dad, that's my job. I said, well, buddy, you're doing an awesome job at your job. Well, about 15 minutes down the road, he decided to make that 2-man argument a 3-man argument. He joined it. The volume raised, mass chaos ensued in the back seat, and I just snapped and I said, Carter. He said, yeah, Dad. I looked up in the rearview mirror again. I said, I thought you said your job was to be good. He said, well, it is, Dad, but I've decided to take the rest of the day off. Hey, don't miss this today. The way the world is, the way culture is, the way that lostness is in our states, in our cities, in our communities, in our country, there is no time for leaders in God's kingdom to take the day off. We know what God's called us to do. We know how God has equipped us. We know the gifts and the skill sets that God has given us, the networks God has given us, the resource God has given us, and we know we are to be fulfilling everything we have within the toolbox that God has given us and wired us for. We are to be pursuing the Great Commission, and there is just no time, like my son, to take the day off from the things we want to do. And so we're going to see in the life and the leadership of Gideon today this incredible story unfold. I want to give you just a little context, and then I want to show you just 3 lessons from his life and leadership that are very applicable to us today. But the context is simply this. Beginning in chapter 6, it talks about the Israelites. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And it says, so God handed them over to Midian. So for a number of 7 years, they oppressed the Israelites, so much so that the Israelites would go out, they would plow the ground, plant crops in order for them to have food, and the Midianites would come in, and man, they would just destroy everything they had worked for, take all the crops, take all the animals, and just leave them with nothing. So it got so bad that the Israelites began to create hiding places, and they would hide from the Midianites and hide from the attacks that they would bring, or the Amalekites. This is where we find Gideon. Gideon was minding his own business in his father's field. In fact, it says in chapter 6 that he was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Minding his own business. But God steps in, and God gives Gideon a massive call to rise up into leadership in uncertain times. The nation was oppressed. Hopelessness was everywhere. Fear gripped the hearts of all of Israel. And yet God found a young man that God put a special call and favor and anointing on his life. But what I want to flesh out with you today is the process of the calling and the leadership of Gideon, because here's what I want you to see today. Gideon and you and Gideon and me are a lot alike. It wasn't some incredible call that God just, his voice from heaven rained down and Gideon said, I've been waiting on this moment my whole life. Yes, God, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. No, listen, he had to wrestle through what does it look like to maximize his life in leadership for the kingdom and for the king. So that's where we find ourselves beginning in chapter 6 today. I want to see just 3 simple lessons of the leadership beginning in verse 11. It says, the angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak or Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Azarite. His son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, the Lord is with you, valiant warrior. Now that's important. Right at the beginning, God gives Gideon an identity for his calling. Why do you think God gives him an identity for his calling? Because you're going to see there are some hard things coming his way. And it's got to be comforting to Gideon that in the midst of the hard things coming his way, and as he had to lead through very difficult circumstances, that he had an identity that God gave him, that he is a valiant warrior. Keep going. Gideon said to him, please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? And where are all his wonders that the ancestors told us about? They said, hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to Midian. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have, deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. Listen to this, verse 14. I am sending you. But he said to him, please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look, my family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my family. Verse 16, but I will be with you. The Lord said to him, you will strike Midian down as if it were one man. The first leadership lesson we see in the life of Gideon today is that our greatest strengths often come from our strongest weaknesses. Our greatest strengths often come from our strongest weaknesses. This is what happens in Gideon. He's just minding his own business. He's trying to thresh wheat and hide it from the Midianites so they don't come and take it, so that his family has something to eat. And all of a sudden, God appears through the angel. God puts this massive calling on his life that Gideon, you are the chosen one. You are the one that I'm going to raise up in leadership to lead the nation, the people that you love, out of the oppression of the Midianites. So Gideon, here's your moment in an uncertain culture, in a fearful moment. Here's your moment to rise up to the occasion of the leadership I'm giving you, and I am calling you. Man, that sounds like an incredible thing, it doesn't? It doesn't sound incredible that you can be minding your business and God says, I'm about to elevate you to a place of leadership and influence that you never could have dreamed to be. That wasn't Gideon's response. This is what I love about Gideon. Gideon's like, I am. Gideon's like, God, this makes no sense whatsoever. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you remember when you were saved? Come on. When God saved you, which, by the way, my professor in college used to say, Nathan, when God saved you, he didn't get a bargain. But you remember when God saved you? You remember that moment you just felt like, I don't know what's next, but I know that I can win the world for Christ, man. I know that God wants to do something in me. I have no idea what it is, but I know he wants to do something in me. That was the feeling that I had when God even called me to ministry. God, I'm ready to go to the ends of the earth for you, but I have no idea what it even means to cross the street in your name. But here's Gideon. This enormous calling of leadership on his life. Begins the internal battle of inadequacy. I can tell you this, I've been serving the Lord in ministry for almost 25 years now. Can I tell you the moment that I felt my first inadequacy was the Wednesday night after I said, I'm all in, I'm walking with God. My student pastor at 17 came up to me and said, hey, that's awesome. Next week you're sharing this story. And I said, no, I'm not. I can't do that. Can I be honest with you today? For 25 years of my life in ministry, internally, I've been constantly plagued with those feelings of inadequacy. That's what I love about Gideon. That's why I resonate with him. It's an incredible call to invest his life in leadership that God is bringing him into, a platform that God is giving to him, an influence that God is allowing him to steward. Man, he begins to wrestle with inadequacy. His weakness actually became his strength. What do we mean? Look what he says. He says, you're going to be a valiant warrior, but yet Gideon's response is, God, I can't do this. Have you not? I mean, Midianites, man, they're an oppressive army. They're an oppressive nation. They are killing us. Do you not see how enormous the task you're asking me to do is? And this is what he says. And not to mention, my family is the weakest of all. And I am the youngest in my family. God, this does not make sense. Well, friend, let me tell you something. In the church that you serve, it's not your ability that brings you to the top of your leadership influence. It is actually the internal weakness and humility that you carry behind the scenes. And if I could tell you of all the times in my life where I felt like, God, there is no way I can do this. God, why are you choosing me? God, why are you asking me to do this? Why are you asking us? Just even currently, man, I'm a part of planting a church with my best friend in the city we live in. And we pulled up and pulled his moving trucks into my driveway. We get out, we looked at each other and said, now what? I have no idea. I've been in ministry 25 years, but I don't know where to start. It's just literally, we say, we don't want a church with us four no more, but it was literally just us four, and at that point, no more. And we just started having these feelings of, God, what are we going to do? But, God, we're going to trust you. You see, our greatest strength is often our weakness. Look what happens in verse 17. He shows doubt. God, I can't do this. Sorry, verse 13. God, I can't do this. Please, Lord. Why is God? Why now? God, I've heard my ancestors talk about how faithful you are, but we feel abandoned. We feel like you've left us. God, what's going on? There's a doubt in his mind about the situation that God is calling him to. There's disappointment that he's dealt with. Look what he says. God, now the Lord has abandoned us. He's handing us over to Midian. How many of you in your leadership, whatever the capacity that's in, how many of you, oftentimes you've had moments of doubt whether God is with you in it, or whether you have the ability to do it, or you've had disappointments that things didn't work out the way you felt like they should or you wanted them to. But look at verse 15, and here's what resonates the most with me with Gideon. There is a fear that he has to flesh out. Look what he says. And he says, please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look, my family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the youngest in my father's family. So he says, man, I have doubt. I have disappointments. God, I'm fearful. There is no way. I'm the youngest there is. Friends, let me tell you something. The pattern of God in Scripture is not to put people who the world says can do it into places of leadership. He puts people that the world says, how did they do it? So that then they're able to say it's by the grace and the goodness of God. You see, first leadership lesson we see from him is our greatest strength is oftentimes our greatest weakness. The second is that our greatest tools are our trials. Now, here's what happens. God says, I'm calling you. It's time to rise up because I'm calling you to it. Gideon in his nature that we see over and over in this passage, he says, now wait a second then. If you're real, if this really is the angel, stay right here. Let me go get a sacrifice. The angel says, go do it. He brings his sacrifice back. The angel instructs him what to do. The angel consumes it, the sacrifice with fire, and then disappears. Gideon's like, whoa, this is real, man. God is really calling me to do this. And then the next test of his leadership is incredibly difficult. Friends, I don't know what avenue you serve the Lord in your church or your ministry, but here's what I will know. Here's what I will tell you. I can't promise you what God will do with you, but I can promise you the journey will be difficult along the way. I think it's just a reminder of how we have to press in to the things of God. I had an opportunity not too long ago to go to my alma mater where I graduated college from and speak to chapel, and I just prayed. I said, Lord, what do I tell these 19, 20-year-olds? What do I wish someone would have told me? And I just stood up for them and said, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. Man, when I was in your place, I felt like I was going to win the world for Christ, and no one ever told me how hard life gets. And I want to tell you today how hard life gets, how hard leadership gets, but I want to tell you how good and faithful God is all through the journey. So what is his first test? Look what he says. Verse 25. And on that very night the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull and a second bull 7 years old, then tear down the altar of Baal that belongs to your father and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Build a well-constructed altar to the Lord your God on top of this mound. Take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down. So Gideon took 10 of his male servants and did so as the Lord told him. But listen to this. But because he was too afraid of his father's family and the men of the city to do it in the daytime, he did it at night. What a turn of events. God calls him. I'm going to call you to lead the nation out of oppression of the Midianites. But here is your first task. I want you to go tear down your father's legacy. What? I thought I was going to beat an army. Now you want it to become very personal. His father had built up these altars to Baal and these Asherah poles. And the very first thing God says is, I want you to go tear down that which your father built. Now here's what I love about God. He says, I don't only want you to tear down what your father built, but when you tear it down, I want you to build an altar to me using the wood of the temple, of the altars to Baal that your God built. So God is just saying, I'm bringing you to a place of humility and trusting. I'm going to call you to do hard things in the future. So to get you started, we're going to make this real personal. I want you to go and I want you to tear down what your father has built. Can you just imagine with me for a moment a little bit of the inner turmoil he must have felt? I had a hat when I was a kid that said, my dad may not always be right, but he's always my dad. Can you imagine the turmoil that was in his heart to say, I know what my dad has built is wrong. I know what God's calling me to, but it's still my father. He's still what he's built. It's still what he's built with his hands. And so he goes, and I love how it just shows how fearful he is, because he doesn't even go during the day where everybody can see him. He sneaks in at night with a group of guys. He tears it down. He builds the altar. And if you keep reading the story, you'll see that the guys in the next morning wonder who in the world did this. They trace him down. They call him out to come be killed. And his father is the one that stands up and defends him and says, listen, he tore it down. If Baal is real, then Baal will deal with him. But friends, listen to me. Here's what I want you to understand about his life and leadership, that his trials were about to begin. He was about to enter into battle. He was about to undergo the calling that God has called him to. But yet, even in the midst of that, God was preparing him through trials and tests and challenges to get him ready for that. Our greatest tools are often our trials. Look what happens. Verse 25, he tells him to go tear down his father's Asherah pole and altar to Baal. So God makes it real personal. Then God makes it real difficult. How do we know it's difficult? Because Gideon was so fearful, he had to go around and do it at nighttime. Friends, let me tell you something about leadership and where you're serving. I don't know your church. I don't know your pastor. You might be the pastor. You may not. I don't know the structure, but here's what I do know. That when God brings us through trials, and I'll share one of those in a moment, here's what I do know. He is shaping you and molding you into what he wants you to be for his kingdom and his namesake. And here's what I want you to hear me to say today. Those are good tools for your life. Those are good tools for your leadership. God's moving in you. He's working in you. He is sharpening the axe in your life. He is getting you ready to be all that he wants you to be in the calling he's given you. When I was a kid, my mom, she's gone to be with the Lord now, but she was 5 foot tall, and she believed in spanking. So don't let the lack of height take away from her velocity of swing. It was there, I'll tell you. And we went in the grocery store, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and she just said I embarrassed her. I just acted up. I never believed her until I had my own kids, and they say you pay for your raising. Now I believe I probably was, but she looked at me in the grocery store. Did any of your parents ever do this? She pointed her little bony finger in my face, and she said, "You wait till I get you home." I knew what that meant, so I thought, well, if I'm going to get one, I might as well get two. So I dug deeper. She was so mad when we got in the car. She puts me in the back of the car. She goes to the front. She's so mad. You ever been so mad you're just talking to yourself, you know, and you're just trying to calm yourself down? She was just so mad in the front seat. She was just angry at me. And all of a sudden, from the back seat, she heard me singing this song. You might remember this song as a kid. He's still working on me to make me what I ought to be. It took him just a week to make the moon and the stars, the sun and the earth and Jupiter and Mars. I love how patient he must be, because he's still working on me. Can I be honest with you? I have no idea how I still remember that song, but it got me out of 2 spankings that day. Praise God for it, right? Hey, listen to me, friends. Let me help you understand something. Whatever trial you're going through, whatever tribulation, whatever challenge, whatever dead end, whatever obstacle, whatever speed bump, whatever the affliction is in your life, know this, that God either causes it or allows it in your life. And He is working in those trials, and He is giving you tools for leadership through those trials, and you will not be the same after those trials because He's still working on you. And this is what's happening in the life of Gideon. Before he could go into battle against the nation, he had to go to battle inwardly against his own heart. Am I willing to do the difficult things that God has called me to do, even if they're personal, even if it has to do with my father, even if it has to do with tearing down something that the whole city appreciates? Am I willing to do the things that are hard in order to prepare myself for the things that seem impossible? You see, we see this. Our greatest strength is our weakness. Our greatest tools are our trials. The third leadership lesson we see out of Gideon's life is this, and it's my favorite, that in leadership, our greatest posture is a posture of dependence and faith. Now, here's the story I never saw about Gideon. So Gideon tears down the pole. He got past that challenge. Then God says, it's time. It's time to fulfill the calling I've called you to. It's time to lead your nation into battle against the Midianites. And even after he had seen the angel, even after he had heard the calling, even after he had made it through the trial and the tribulation of tearing down what his father had built, Gideon is still wrestling with his calling and the call that God's got in his life. That's why I love this guy, because I'm the same way. So God says it's time, and Gideon says, wait a second, God, just wait one more second. Can I just make sure again this is you? Like, watching you consume the altar was not enough. Watching you deliver me from the angry mob that wanted to take me out because I cut down the Asherah pole and the altar to Baal, it's not enough. So God, would you show me a sign through fleece? Now let's just be honest this morning. How many of us have ever put a fleece before the Lord because we saw what happened with Gideon? Of course, all of us. It's kind of like that guy that knew he was on a diet, knew he was not supposed to have donuts, pulled in Krispy Kreme. He said, no, I'm not going to do it. He said, but God, here's the deal. There's no parking places. I'm going to drive around. If a parking place opens up, I'll consider it to be your will. On his 9th trip around, a parking place opened up, and he steps in, and, you know. I mean, that's kind of how it is in my life. Like, God, come on, man. Put the fleece out. Gideon puts out the fleece. God answers it. And here's what Gideon does. God, that was awesome. Can we do it again? Oh, man, I love Gideon. These guys in leadership, that's my life. God, are you sure? Are you sure I'm supposed to make this decision? Are you sure I'm supposed to take this step? Are you sure this is what you're calling me to do? Are you absolutely sure that this is what you have for me? God answers yes. Okay, God, thank you. But are you sure you're sure? So he puts out the fleece the second time, and God answers it. So now Gideon knows, and here's the part of the story I never read. It's become my favorite part. Follow quickly. Here's the thought process. Our greatest posture is a life of dependence and faith. Why? Verse chapter 7. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill Moriah in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, listen to this, you ready for this? You have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, I saved myself. Now announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 of the troops turned back and about 10,000 remained. So picture this. Gideon, in the calling, raised up 32,000 people ready to fight for their country. Ready to fight for Israel. Ready to get out of the oppression. To quit hiding. 32,000 people he had inspired and motivated, and he's ready now. He's gotten the fleece. He's been through the hard times. He's watched God consume the altar. Now he is ready to go, and he steps up and he says, all right, God, here we go. And God says, no, it's not going to work this way. What do you mean it's not going to work this way? God says, here's the problem. You've got so many troops now that if I let you go into battle this way, when you win, you're going to take the credit for it. And remember what God says, I'm a jealous God. I will not give my glory to others. So Gideon, here's what we're going to do. I'm about to reduce you down to where only I can get the glory in your life and leadership. So God says this, I want you to go and ask everyone who's fearful to raise their hand. They go, listen to this, 22,000. Raise their hand. God says, send them home. Now, there's a lot of questions I have in heaven if I have a chance to ask. But one is, I'm going to find Gideon and go, tell me what that was like. Are you kidding me? I raised up an army to guarantee success, and you are about to strip me away from everything I have been working for. God says, yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Because it's me that wants the glory in your life, Gideon. So Gideon says, fine, 22,000, go home, you're off the hook. The rest of the 10,000 will just probably die. God says, no, Gideon, it don't work that way. 10,000 is too many for the battle. No, Lord, no, I'm not doing that. No, 10,000 is too many. This is what he says. Lord said, Gideon, there are still too many troops. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. He says this, the one that can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot. So he brought the troops down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog, and do the same with everyone who kneels to drink. The number who lapped with their hands in their mouths were 300 men, and the rest took a knee to drink water. So God in his humor says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the water, tell everybody to take a drink. The ones who lap it like a dog, set them to the side. The ones who kneel normal, set them to the side. We're about to have another pruning. Look what happens. There's 10,000 left. God reduces it down to 300. Watch this. Less than 1% of what he started with. And God says, now you're ready. Because here's the deal. Now I'm going to get the glory, and now the glory that I get is going to be based on an impossibility. I'm going to let you beat the nation of Midian with 300. Do you know what, friends? Oftentimes in leadership, our posture is to take pride in the 32,000 rather than faith and dependence that God has 300. Oftentimes in our leadership, we want the brass that everybody gets to see. We want the bling of ministry. We want the big, the broad, but yet all God is saying is, all I want is the glory. Why I love Gideon so much is because Gideon is me. Fighting tooth and nail all the way, but yet God keeping him humble and bringing him to a place to say, man, you got to remember, it is I who allows or causes things in your life. So in the church you're serving, the ministry you're serving, it would serve you well today to take a posture of fully depending on the Lord, saying, God, this seems impossible. By the way, it does. Nevada is lost. And it seems impossible apart from a movement of God. And the way that I believe God is going to move is through the local church, because it is God's plan A. There is no plan B. In the life and leadership of Gideon, man, he shows us that oftentimes our greatest strength is our weaknesses. He shows us that Our greatest tools in our life are trials and leadership, and he shows us that, man, the greatest posture we can have is really dependence and faith. Let me close with this, and I'm going to go very, very quickly, so just stick with me. Pastor, they called me and they said, Pastor, we know you lost your son. We'd like to give you a burial plot if you want to have a service and bury your little boy. We'd like to do it, but it's 30 minutes the other way. And I said, I'll take it. We buried our son. So as we began talking to this little couple, we began to realize that our son and their daughter were buried in the same cemetery some 30 minutes away. Man, God, what are you doing? As we began to talk even a little further, we began to realize that our little baby boy and their little baby girl are actually, the best we can tell, pull in, take a left, go up here. Our little baby boy and their little baby girl are buried not only in the same cemetery some 30 minutes away, but in plots next to each other. That's God. That's a pretty cool story if it ended there. 2017, so years later, a decade later, God moved my family to Denver, Colorado. Lived in a little place called Westminster. A church in Florida called me and said, hey, we lost our pastor. Would you come preach? I got on a plane to Denver. I flew, preached in Naples, Florida. I was sharing the story how God never wastes your pain. I get back on a plane. By the time I get home, my wife says, there's this guy that reached out to me on Facebook and wants to talk to you. And so I called him. And he said, hey, you don't know me. My name's so-and-so. And he said, you just preached in Florida yesterday, right? I said, yeah. He said, what you don't know is there was a guy that works with me sitting in the choir of this church, and he heard the story of how God redeemed your pain of your son. And he said, what you don't know is he called me Sunday afternoon and said, you and your wife have to listen to this. He said, because Nathan, my wife and I just had a stillborn little child. And he said, that night we sat in our bed and we just cried because for the first time through our trial, we felt a sense of it's going to be okay because God's going to redeem it. And he said, man, I just wanted to encourage you. And I said, great, man. I said, where do you live? He said, well, I live in this place in Colorado called North Glen. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. I said, I live in Westminster. It's 5 minutes apart. He said, can we get together? I said, sure. So we got together for coffee. We started talking about our family. And he goes, hey, man, tell me a little about your family. I said, well, my wife teaches in Arvada, which is about 20 minutes away at this private school called Faith Christian. And he goes, you got to be kidding me. I said, I'm not kidding you. He said, I said, my wife teaches there. My kids go there. He goes, my daughter goes there. And he looks at me and goes, oh, did you just speak at the 8th grade graduation 3 weeks ago? I said, I did. My son's in 8th grade. He goes, my daughter is in 8th grade at the same Christian school. Don't miss this. 7 billion people on earth. His 8th grader, my 8th grader, go to the same small Christian school in Arvada, Colorado. God takes a guy, breaks him, then he blesses him. This is the story of Gideon. He takes him, he breaks him, he blesses him. Listen to me, friends, in closing. God takes me from a small church in East Texas. He moves me around through trials and tribulations and always redeeming the pain. He sends me to Denver, only to send me on a plane ride to Florida, only to then have somebody in Denver listen to what I said in Florida, only for us to meet together and realize that on planet Earth, as big as it is, God has connected us, and our kids went to the same Christian school. Listen to me. Don't tell me God can't take the heart of a leader who says, God, in my weakness, I want your strength. God, whatever the trial and the tribulation of leadership, man, would you allow it to be a tool that sharpens what I want in my life for your kingdom and your glory? And God, I want the posture of my life and my heart to be one that's fully dependent and faithful on you. Let me tell you something. God will take you in your leadership role when you're dependent and your faith is in him, and he will do things you cannot believe. Because that is the God of Gideon, and that is the God we serve. Lead forward, lead hard, but lead humbly. Father, I pray by the power of your Holy Spirit that God, you'd move today in the lives of these leaders across this place. Father, you would utilize them in the way that, God, you've gifted them and wired them. God, that today would be a great day of encouragement and equipping. And God, I pray that any of the trials in their life and leadership that they're experiencing, that they would realize, God, that as they press into you, you're going to take that, you're going to redeem it for your glory. That, God, it may be that you're going to reduce us down beyond where we think we need to be or doing, so that you get the most honor and glory in it.